The views and opinions in this program are not those of CISA 7 or Spectrum.
Welcome everybody to this special board meeting for Monday, October 10, 2022. We are going to go right into roll call. Kinsey?
Smith?
Here.
Becker?
Andrew will be joining us when he can.
McCoy?
Here.
Leighton and Warren?
Here.
Welch?
Here.
Lyerly?
Here.
Mills?
Here.
Okay. We are also joined at the table by our interim superintendent, Vicki Beyer, and members of her cabinet. And I think we can start in on our agenda. We have some action items. The first one is employment of staff. Would someone like to read the motion?
Sure. I move that the employment of staff as presented be approved.
Second.
Any discussion? Kinsey?
Online voting is now open. All votes have been entered and the motion is carried with all board members voting in favor.
Thank you. Next is resignation of staff. Would someone like to read the motion?
I move that the resignation of staff as presented be approved.
Second.
Any discussion? Kinsey?
Laura, just letting you know, Andrew is here now.
Oh, is he able to vote? Andrew, can you hear us?
Yes, and if the motion could be reread so I know what I'm voting on, I should be able to vote.
Okay, let's redo that then. Letter B, go ahead.
I move that the resignation of staff as presented be approved.
Second.
All right, let's do it again.
Andrew, are you okay voting verbally right now?
I will vote verbally aye.
Okay. All votes have been entered and the motion has carried with all board members voting in favor.
Very good, thank you. All right, C is the selection of the superintendent search firm. I think the best way to go about this would be to go ahead and make a motion and second it. I'll go ahead and do that, just so you all understand that this is not a done deal by inserting this particular name into it. We can go backwards. We can discuss the particular one that I'm going to recommend, and then we can do it with a different company as well. But we can vote it up or down. So just to get things going, I'm going to make the following motion. I move that WASB be contracted to assist the Board of Education in the superintendent search.
Second.
Okay. Andrew, did you say something?
I was gonna second, but
Okay.
someone beat me to it.
Okay, so then I would like to open the floor for discussion. If people have things they want to share, thoughts, concerns, I'm happy to. Go ahead, James.
Does the board get to see the final rubric, or is that not appropriate?
We weren't going to do that publicly. But I think you did get the final count, right?
No.
Was it in the weekly summary? Yeah.
I
Okay, let's see if I can, all right.
But I thought we got all the resumes for WASB.
I'm not sure what you mean, Andrew.
Okay, maybe it's two different questions, but WASB, did they not say in their proposal that the board receives the resumes of all the applicants?
I believe so, yeah.
Okay.
Is
So I'm
that
sorry,
some,
maybe I intruded into a different question that I didn't understand. So I'll just stand by.
okay. In the rubric, the totals showed that WASB got the most points. And that's why I'm starting it this way. But again, just to reiterate, it doesn't have to go that way.
Laura, just a question for Melissa through you, if that's all right. Because we haven't had any, while we had the opportunity for public feedback through our email and correspondence that way, I don't believe we've had a public forum session since the presentation. Would it be out of order to ask if anyone in the audience has any feedback on that before we make our decision?
So special board meetings do not include public comment. You can always suspend the rules at any point and open the floor for public comment through a motion under Robert's rules, if that's what you want to do.
I would like to make a motion to suspend the rules for the special board meeting to allow public comments only on the superintendent selection committee.
Second.
Oh,
Oop,
hold on.
hang
I'm
on,
going
hang
to
on.
change that.
There is a motion on the floor though for the, so are we going to do? Okay.
I'm going to speak to ask a friendly of the makers of the motion to remove their motion.
City council doesn't discard their motion to have interested parties address the board, do they?
I think my original motion. Okay.
Is that what we're doing? We're keeping the original motion and we're going to.
I'll reintroduce it. I'd like
Okay.
to make a motion to suspend the rules of our special board meeting to allow any public comments on the superintendent search.
I'll second. That's a privileged motion. It's
Okay. Do we have to vote on that then? A roll
Mhm.
call or all in favor? Okay, Kinsey,
McCoy,
aye.
Smith,
Aye.
Mills,
Aye.
Welch,
Aye.
Becker,
aye.
Leighton and Warren,
Aye.
Lyerly.
Aye.
Okay, so the floor is open now for anyone who would like to discuss. Is there anyone who would like to speak to this motion? I don't see anybody.
I move to close the floor for public speaking and return to the initial motion.
I will second that. I'm sorry, is this all in favor? Nope, got to do a roll call. Okay, we're going to take another vote.
Lyerly,
Aye.
Layton and Warren,
Aye.
Becker,
Aye.
Welch,
Aye.
Mills,
Aye.
Smith,
Aye.
McCoy.
Aye, motion passes. Our amendment, no, how are we talking, is it a motion? Okay. So we're back to the original motion. And the floor is open to discussion. Okay. So James, I believe we were going to, you had a question.
So I found the cumulative total, but it doesn't break it down. So the rubric is not available to board members. That's correct.
Yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, go ahead.
Can I ask a question about what you just did?
With the reason I brought that forward was just with a decision this important and us not having a regular public forum from the first presentation to us taking a vote on this, on the unlikely event that someone was here to speak on it. I wanted to make sure they had an opportunity to speak on it before we discussed on it. So.
Okay. Go
Okay. I would just like to say my major concerns about WASB was that they really aren't going out to recruit. It's going to be more just of a, find somebody, put stuff out there. And I almost feel we could almost do that ourselves.
Okay.
I don't know how to recruit like at that level.
Mhm.
And I thought that would be one of the drawbacks, although the price was pretty good, I must admit. But then the other thing was that the one thing that BWP had in it that I thought was just really good was the fact that they wanted to individually interview each board member. And I think we've come from such different backgrounds that that would really be something so good.
Yeah.
So,
Okay. I feel like if we wanted to make that request from WASB, we could probably do that,
but not to recruit.
but not recruit. That's not their policy.
Mhm.
Yeah. So anybody else? Laura?
I just wanted to point out that there was just a 4-point difference between the top two, so that's very close. And I think seeing the rubric would be helpful to just see where, if everybody was on the same of what was most important or rated high. I know for me, BWP and Associates was my first choice, although considering there was cost difference, I think that this is absolutely the most important thing that we can do as a board. And I felt that I was incredibly impressed by what they proposed to do, their commitment to searching wide and far, casting a broad net to bring us the best possible and diverse candidates that could be good for our district. And so that was my first choice. And I see it's with them being so close, it's good
Okay.
that we're able to discuss.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So go ahead, James.
So Laura, I agree. They were my first choice as well. And when I looked at the cost, having recruited many positions in my tenure, none of the costs were out of range, right? When you're recruiting for a senior executive, that 20% of first year salary is a minimum that you would pay in a professional environment. So I looked at that and honestly, I discounted the difference in cost because of the importance of the decision. And when I looked at it, we put to market an RFP that was crafted to make sure that we got proposals that were sensitive to our diversity, requirements. And that first presentation of the three were the only ones that led with that. And so I do think that even if we get to see the rubric to make sure that the difference is not based on their sensitivity and their competency in recruiting.
Okay.
In support of the Association of School Boards, on the last 2 pages of their handout that they gave us for their proposal, they talk about their that belongs to the National Affiliation of Superintendent Searchers, and that looks like a 40-state coalition of groups that will also assist with superintendent searches. So I completely understand the reasoning, the concern where they had focused on Wisconsin, but it looks like they've got a system set up where they'll reach out to other states as well with it.
Okay. Andrew?
Yes, so I have every other superintendent search that I've done. So this is something different I'm doing. In the past, I have not considered WASB because ethically they can't recruit away an existing superintendent because that would be a superintendent of a member district. I've come to the conclusion, for me in this situation, I don't think there's any sitting superintendent in the state who won't know about a vacancy in Green Bay. And so I think they will either apply or not apply based on their desire to be the superintendent in Green Bay. I think that with the national network that was mentioned that they are part of, that I'm comfortable with that. I'm only comfortable with I can't vote yes for any firm that doesn't give us all the resumes. I think we're just I don't want to put that much control in the hands of a firm as to knock 3/4 of the applicants out before we read the resumes. So that's why on WASB, I do think cost is a factor, unless I thought we were going to get much more from another firm, and I just don't think we'll get much more from another firm. We might get a little more. I'm hard pressed to think that we're going to get a lot of different candidates either way. This is a well-known district, and I think people who are looking will be aware. Thank you.
So BWP was my first choice too. The recruiting was a big thing for me. The fact that they actively recruit, and I just felt that they seemed to have the biggest reach and the most connections nationally. I went through and I actually added a point to WASB because they were half the price. But I agree with James and Laura. This is the most important decision we are going to make. And I wouldn't choose somebody that I felt would not do as good a job based off of a minimal cost difference.
Okay. I'll just speak for myself. I do agree with a lot of what Andrew said. Having been through this once before, there's a huge difference between firms. They all make more or less the same proposal. What WASB said about not recruiting is a big thing. But I think that with their network and their connections, we will still get a comparable slate of candidates to them. And the cost savings is very, very significant. We can also, if we choose, ask them to do more than they proposed. I think they were open to adding some services. All three said they would. So if there's something in particular that we really want them to do, I think we could request that of them. For instance, like, I can't remember if WASB said they do a survey. Okay. There's a lot of similarity. So I'm comfortable with them. They are my first choice. But I am open to more further discussion. We go ahead.
In the past, like you were there for one search, were
Yes.
they one of the three that were chosen last time?
No.
Have they ever been chosen?
Andrew, in your memory, has WASB ever been a finalist?
Have we ever used them for the full search? I don't think so.
Okay. Have they ever been a finalist?
Oh, I think that, well, I think in years past, I think there may have only been enough applicants that we interviewed them all. I don't remember 3, 4, or 5, but yes.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
So I think they were probably a de facto finalist because we just interviewed whoever applied, and there were maybe 4 or 5 or 6 in a given year.
Okay.
We
Is it possible?
we didn't have an official whittling down process that I remember, but it's been a while since we've done one of these.
It's possible that they weren't doing that kind of work at the time. Our expert at that is actually sitting in our audience here, but it's possible that they, weren't doing that kind of work for the, when your tenure began. Something I didn't mention that is also, I think, important is that they have a knowledge of our district that is not the same as the other two. That's a deeper knowledge just because of their personal experience at their time here in our district. So that is to our advantage. So I just wanted to mention that. Anybody else want to go ahead?
I'm done. Thank you.
In regards to the recruiting question, I left my notes at home with all the other information on it, but what was concerning with that is one firm said they would recruit, but not candidates that they have previously placed. So while the recruitment process is out there, and I understand the whole disagreement of taking ones that you've placed, that kind of limits the pool of who you're going to actively recruit, which in our situation, we'd appreciate, all of the best candidates, but in 2 years, we don't want them to necessarily do the same thing. So the amount of weight put on that, I think, should be minimal.
Yeah. I agree with Andrew in that when he said that people, at least in Wisconsin, and maybe even a little bit further out, have known that we're looking for a superintendent now for months. So those people are already have been thinking about it and considering it, and they don't really need a firm, a consulting firm to tell them to apply for this job. They probably already have been considering it for quite some time. So I just wanted to mention that. So anybody, go ahead.
So hearing the debate tonight, I think that I don't have a comfort level that in using the rubric to grade, that we had a shared understanding of how we weighted responses, right? And this is a really important decision because, Brian, I when looking at a membership organization who has an ancillary service of helping districts perform superintendent searches compared to an organization that their revenue stream is placing superintendents and right sizing them. We did not ask the question of them whether or not they would share all resumes that they would receive. They did say that they would pre-sort them, but that's what we hire this organization to do. I agree with Andrew. If they said absolutely not, you can't have access to them, that'd be a red flag, right? But when I looked at the services provided, there was a definite difference between active and passive recruiting. Because you're a member of a national organization, what that manifests is them putting an ad in the database that all of these organizations, that is very passive organization. And the assumption that everyone that would be interested in this job, it's on their radar, I would like to test that, because there are people out there that are comfortable and have not realized that maybe it's time yet to make a move. And recruiting is a contact sport, right? You have to reach out. These people they're driven to do this. So I think there is at least reason enough to pull the rubrics, understand them, and how we weighted, because I was generous on all of the presentations. So if I scored someone the first choice 1 point different than second choice, and that is not how everyone else kind of used the definition of meets expectations or doesn't meet expectations, I would enjoy, and I think it's our responsibility to understand whether or not we're going to enter into a relationship with a firm based on a pretty insufficient understanding of the rubric data.
Go ahead, Laura.
To build on that, I recall when we looked at this a while back about what we were going to use the criteria to search for our committee, I feel like there was more definition behind what each of the things were. But on our scoring sheet, for example, it had stakeholder input process. So I'm not sure who would guide us, if it would be Melissa or somebody on this process, but I feel like that was so broad. Overall process we rated, but there, I thought, I don't know, there was a further definition of what these look like in the past when we identified what they may be. And if not, I think that would be helpful. And I know when I do interviews or, if I have a committee scoring, it would be, here's the question, here I'm looking for ... Here is to be, some things that are, would be some good things that would know that this is how they know Green Bay or things like that. So I think it was really, it's a good process, but for me going through it the first time, I felt not like I really had a really good grasp on the best way to score them.
Well, I mean, it is quite subjective, to whatever your gut response was at the time. And I filled mine out as we were doing it, as we were interviewing it, so that that gut reaction was kind of my way to, I don't know what the rest of you did, but I kind of decided I was going to do it that way. So go ahead.
Was there any expectation of privacy when someone filled out their rubric from other board members?
How do y'all feel about that? Well, we weren't supposed to consult each other
Right.
at all, which we did not, as far as so.
My question is, James was in, I'm sorry if I'm speaking for you on this, James. I'm perfectly happy to share where I scored out each person. I don't have any expectation of privacy on this. And if other board members are on the same page, I'd be perfectly fine sharing out if others are on the same spot. But if any board member has an expectation of privacy on that, then I'm not sure if we'd be able to do that. And Melissa, you're standing up.
Kinsey and I were just discussing, each board member's scoring is a public record. So there can't really be a reasonable expectation of privacy anyway. One of the reasons it wasn't shared was, again, to avoid the walking quorum and have this discussion here tonight. So it absolutely is a public record. You can share it with each other. I'm assuming we'll be receiving a request for it anyway. So it may be good for you to have it so that you can discuss it.
Is Kinsey running it off now?
She's printing it off.
Okay. Can we just all pause for a moment? Unless, I'm sorry, I guess we can keep talking. Yeah. Andrew, did you have a question?
I guess what I would just say to this is, to me, it is a small negative for me that WSB, can't actively recruit, but if we have other firms that won't recruit people that they've placed, presumably that's their best people because they're placed. So I guess to me, seeing all the resumes and making our own decision on who to interview off of all resumes, That to me is at least equal to the fact that BWP is going to throw 20 of them away and we'll never see them. And what if their seventh would have been the first for a couple of us? And what we'll never, I don't know how likely it is, but we'll never know. With WASB, we get to see all resumes and make the all important first cut. And I might be in a different spot if BWP had a board reviews all resumes process, but they don't.
So that's a deal breaker for you?
Yes.
Okay. I get it. So.
But Andrew, I think that what you're saying then is that they've just placed people that would want to be in Green Bay. I mean, you know, they're looking specifically for Green Bay. You know, everybody doesn't want to come here. You know what I'm saying? It's like they wouldn't go back to their people just because they're good people. There's a lot of good people. I think the recruitment thing is really essential.
Andrew, are you saying you want to see the resumes of everybody who does apply?
Right.
Right. I think WSB said that, did they not? That
Yeah.
the resume, all resumes belong to the board, and the board decides who's coming in for interviews, and they're assisting with process.
Yeah.
I thought, if I'm wrong, correct me. I thought though that they said all the resumes are yours, and you decide who you're bringing in.
That's right. That was part of what Busby said. Can we ask BWP if we could get all resume? I mean, it's not their, maybe that's not their process. It's not what they shared. I'm wondering if that's something they would be willing to do to give us all resumes. And that's not, I mean, that's not a deciding factor for me, but if it's important, I mean, I agree with James.
Just a
If
second.
they present a final slate, though, if they present a final slate and a board member would have to get a majority vote to pull in an additional resume that the firm didn't recommend, that's such a high bar that it would never happen anyway. So I guess for me, when I say all the resumes, it's the board making the first and the board making the first cut is important to me, because I think that's a critical stage where someone important, or especially someone non-traditional or unique, could be missed in that first cut, and we would never know that they were cut.
Okay. James.
So I would like it on the record.
Mm-hmm.
I have no experience in HR. I have no experience in recruiting. I have absolutely the minimal experience necessary to read the resume of someone that would apply for this job and make a decision worth recording in, publicly. So to look at all of our different experiences and to say we are in a better position to filter out resumes and to come up with a slate of candidates that represent the best applicants applying for this job, I would challenge that, given that I don't think any of your resumes say recruiter on them. And if I'm wrong, please feel free correcting me. So I don't know if we intend to turn this over to the administration to let HR or someone there assist us, but I know that there is a public position that engaging recruiting firms in general is contrary to some public opinions, and that we should go with someone that we know. The decision to use any kind of firm would be to diversify our candidate slate beyond well-known individuals. So I'm not in the position to be effective at that role.
All right. Go ahead, Brian.
I fully agree with the being able to see the resumes, but my concern, and this is going to be a question for you, Melissa, on this is, if we are provided those, do those become open record as well? And if they do, and a person wanted to be considered for the application with some confidentiality because of their current employer, would that put us in a difficult spot?
So Brian, there is no award for stumping the lawyer tonight. I just want, if that's what you're going for, there's for stumping the lawyer. If that's what you're going for, there's no award. So the public records law says that the candidates that are determined to be the finalist candidates are who you have to give out through a public records request. The law then, there's a number of attorney general opinions that then qualify as to what finalist means. I can't rattle them off, but I know that we looked at this pretty closely with the last superintendent search. That is one of the reasons that the firms do suggest not to see that the whole candidate. I don't believe that makes the individual as a finalist candidate. If you're never considered for the position, you can't be a finalist candidate. So people that you don't interview cannot be a finalist candidate. The issue though is, and I heard James say, I'm not an HR professional. So the issue with lay people seeing candidates and screening them is you want to make sure you're not doing it on any impermissible or discriminatory basis. I think you're all very smart people, and there can be someone sitting with you from WASB as you do so to ensure that that doesn't happen. I do have personal experience with using WASB as a search firm. The school board did screen the candidates, and it wasn't the school board, but a different school board in a neighboring district. And WASB did sit with the board and made sure that they did so in a legally sufficient manner. Go ahead, Laura.
I think that is a part of the difference, is that evaluating and looking at all of the resumes, all of the applications, that's a time-consuming process. And it's very painstaking to make sure that they meet all the things you're looking for. And I think that's part of the reason why you go with a search firm for an executive position, for them to go through. And if they're even meeting with us individually, for us to say, this is what we're looking for, there's a certain level of trust. And I think that's why there's references and all the things that go, so that we know that they're an ethical firm to be able to weed through all the applications for us. And I'm guessing that's the price difference. I think way back I said, well, why don't we just do our own? And I kind of feel like WASB is, if we're going to go through and weed through every application, it's just a completely different process. It's just a lot more time consuming. It's a lot more demanding. And that's why I see the reason for the first firm. So
Okay.
that's
Right. Brian?
My understanding was that WASB would provide the resumes if we would like. They would still be going through and screening them and presenting the best options or their top picks. Am I incorrect on that?
I think they'd also check, do like background checks. They, all these firms do that process pretty rigorously. So.
I think it's important, because I walked away from that meeting saying no, that they would collect them. They did the advertising, and then they passed the resumes unfiltered, unprioritized to us for that activity. So that was the difference. I think going to the other firms and saying, hey, can we have the raw, we want to verify your filtering process or your methodologies, or we want access to the raw resumes, is different than WASB, because they did not make any representation that they would add value to the filtering and prioritization process, and which was a key. That was the one thing that I marked them as deficit for in that process. So if I'm wrong, we need to clear that up.
I guess following up on that, did they give any indication that they wouldn't, though, also?
It was their primary presentation that was not their process.
Andrew?
So page 14 of WASB, about 2/3 of the way down, it does say WSB works with the board to identify those to be interviewed. Ultimately, the decision about who to interview is left with the board. This is a unique feature of the WASB search, which is open for modification should the board desire to handle all applications in a different manner, but that would also become a deal breaker for me if they didn't show us all the resumes. But I don't think it was ever, I never interpreted it as we would get no help in narrowing down. I think they're clearly saying that they do work with the board to identify those to be interviewed, and so that's I feel pretty comfortable with that. I don't think it's just, I mean, yes, if it was here's your resumes unsorted and call us when you have it figured out how many and when you want to interview, then I would be starting to think, is it that maybe we shouldn't just, at that point, are we just better off to, advertise ourselves? But I think they are adding value to the selection of first interviews and to the selection of finalists. I think they're telling us here that they are part of that process.
Go ahead, James.
So in the presentation, I think the difference, Andrew, for me was the definition of helping the board was against or reviewing or evaluating the resume itself and the application. So in comparison to the other firms where they actually had interviews in advance with those candidates to help sort down and make a determination. So there is no qualitative additional information that's not on page that I took from WASB's presentation as what they provide, right? So they accumulated the resumes, they provided them. And so it may be that Melissa's definition of helping the board make decisions that were not using or filtering out resumes on impermissible information may be their definition of helping the board. So I just didn't see any additional data collection other than the resume.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Laura.
Just one more comment to go for, I'm looking at my notes and I wrote for WASB, I have, for number 5 about the slate of candidates. My note was, yes, we get all of the candidates and they provide us a rubric to score the candidates. So that's different. But I think the good thing is that we had 3 strong teams come forward and knowing that I feel good about us getting a solid candidate in here. Did WASB, maybe you guys were able to gather this, did you get the feeling that WASB would reach far beyond the state? Because I mean, we talk about Green Bay being one of the big 5, right? I mean, I don't know that somebody from rural Wisconsin is going to come in and do the job we need in this district. And so that's another little bit of the concern that I have for having a smaller pool, which it seemed like with WASB.
Well, just to kind of go a little further down, I was just revisiting the list of districts, large and small, that have done superintendent searches since 2017-18 that WASB has done. And so Appleton, Beloit, Denmark, Kenosha, South Milwaukee, Superior, some of the, well, Denmark's not one of the larger ones, but there's quite a lot of school districts here. Most of them small or medium size, obviously, and only 1 or 2 that are as big as Green Bay. But I mean, I think it just speaks to the fact that they have done a lot of this kind of work and for lots and lots of different, very different school districts. I'm just gonna put that out there. All right. Go ahead, Brian. Oh, go ahead, Nancy. No, Brian?
Looking at just one resource that has a lot of administrative positions posted nationally, none of the firms have a large presence as far as advertising those positions. I'm looking at Ed Week's job listings, which is it's a website of education news, and none of the three firms have an overwhelming amount of ads on there. So the national reach maybe in different spots, but I don't see any of them necessarily jumping out with it. But
we didn't have a lot of our slate of candidates the last time were pretty much from the upper Midwest or Wisconsin. Of course, there were, obviously one from Iowa and one from Tennessee as well. And those were our finalists. So, okay, go ahead, James.
So Brian, I think I saw one of the same resources that you just referenced. When I looked at that, I thought back to the presentations, and the first consulting firm made a presentation that was not based on putting advertisements out and using those networks, but more using the internal recruiting networks that they had established that may not manifest as ads in this kind of publications.
Go ahead, Brian.
And I think following up on that an informal network search is obviously beneficial. It's how we find a lot of positions, any employer, I would assume. For WASBA to also talk about their National Association of School Board Searches, whatever that group was I mentioned on the back page, is that they do have a system set up with it. Earlier, I can't remember if someone had concern about their experience as this being kind of a service that they provide. They speak of decades of search services within the state for school boards here. So while I haven't been on a superintendent search in this capacity, they're stating that they've been doing it for a while on here as well. So they have some familiarity with it, but it gives them that network within Wisconsin. I think we all see the same thing, that the weakness there is they are admittedly Wisconsin focused as far as where the candidates draw from. So.
Okay. Any other comments?
Does anyone have anything individual on their rubric that they want to speak of to share, or?
So I can submit that when I judged the rubric, I only saw and I only rated WASB as not meeting expectations based on their passive recruiting approach in the state, and that they are a member organization and would not actively reach out to anyone in their membership, right? So given that, every other organization that presented, I have been meeting expectations. So when I look at the differences in scores, so that's why there's a 3-point difference between my first, second, and third, and I see 5-point differences. So if anyone would share, where others felt like firms didn't meet expectations of the search, I'd be interested in hearing that, because I do see the differences between some of the scorings being 5 points. Given the scale of the rubric, there were some doesn't meet expectations in the scoring, which leads to a 4-point difference in the total. So
it might be helpful at this point to ask everybody if they have pretty much decided against McPherson and Jacobson. Is there anyone here that had that as their first choice? Okay.
I had them tied with the first group.
Okay.
So I mean, on mine there's a 6-point difference between them. So
okay. So it sounds like we can pretty much stop consideration of that particular firm. Okay. I don't think we have to vote on that or anything. But Yeah, that does narrow it down. So, so here's, I think, unless there's other discussion, which obviously we should talk about this as long as people need to, because it's a big decision. Go ahead, Brian.
My biggest concerns were their ability to sell Green Bay and the familiarity with Green Bay, but also that they would recruit, but they would not recruit a sitting superintendent. So I had marked them down on the overall on steps to ensure. And it did not appear that there was much understanding of Green Bay, but also the question in particular with Wisconsin politics and how that impacts our state. The interview question with that, I forgot, was number 3 or 4 on there. I didn't think that they adequately answered that question and kind of glossed over a bit of it, which is obviously a huge part of being a superintendent of the 3rd largest district in the state.
Okay. Go ahead.
So Brian, they said that they wouldn't unseat any superintendent, or just not the ones they just placed?
But yeah, that's what I meant, was that they wouldn't recruit any of the candidates that they had placed.
Brian, when using the rubric, if that was the criteria for saying that they didn't meet expectations because given their placement history, they wouldn't go back to someone that they just placed, did you also see the same not meeting expectations based on WASB not approaching anyone in their membership?
No, because I viewed it as a difference of we'll recruit some people, but not anyone we've placed, as opposed to we're going to advertise this position to everyone. Does that answer your question on it? Okay.
I think that it's a good time to say this again, that people who might be considering leaving their current position in the state of Wisconsin to come to Green Bay and apply for this position have known since April that that was a possibility, and they don't really need a consulting firm to have them consider that. That is, they all talk to each other. They all kind of know each other. This has been known in our state for a number of months now. So, Andrew, did you have something to say?
Well, yeah, it's possible, it's probable that something that, for example, James and I might have a completely opposite deal breaker, right? If my deal breaker is not being able to see all the resumes because I'm concerned that the one I want might be the one eliminated in 7th place by the firm, right? And James has a top concern of using the expertise of the search firm to choose the best 7, then ultimately we're just not going to vote for the same firm, and that's okay, right?
Exactly.
So I think that's where we're at. So
Okay. Exactly. I think you just hit the nail on the head. Is there anybody else with any concerns? Go ahead, Brian.
I also agree with Laura with what you're saying. There is a significant cost difference between there. And I don't see a huge separation in the services that's worth double the price on there. So
that is a significant point for me personally, is the roughly $20,000 less. So, yeah. Go ahead. You sure? Okay.
I think we're probably set up to vote.
Are we set up to vote? Okay. So, I'm going to, does everyone understand what the motion is? That we have, that WASB is currently there as the firm to be contracted to assist the Board of Education in the superintendent search. So if you want to choose WASB, then you would vote yes on this. If not, then we will move on to the next candidate. Everyone, I just want to make sure everyone understands what we're doing here. Okay. All right, Kinsey, I think we're ready.
Online voting is now open. All votes have been entered and the motion did not carry. The results of the individual board member votes are as follows. Smith, no. Becker, yes. McCoy, yes. Leighton and Warren, no. Welch, no. Lyerly, no. Mills, yes.
Okay. Motion fails. So then the next motion, is everyone okay with me making this? Okay. That I move that BWP and Associates be contracted to assist the Board of Education in the superintendent search.
Second.
Okay, discussion? Questions? Andrew? Oh, sorry, we can't hear you, Andrew.
I realize the way this vote is going to go, but I think it is a serious problem that, you know, someone unique or different will not, a board member won't be able to argue for someone to make the first cut. And I think it will just result in more, and I don't mean this in any demographic or diversity way, but I think just outside the box doesn't come from a high-powered search firm. Looking at outside the box could come from looking at all the resumes and let's give this one a shot too. So I guess I'd be interested in exploring with them if we can have more of a role, or look at ones that didn't make the cut and advocate to add some. But ultimately my vote is no, because primarily of not of them selecting the finalists, but secondary cost is meaningful to me too. So my vote will be no on this one.
I think that we can, as the people who are going to hire this firm, push for that. I don't see why we shouldn't and why we can't. Right? So we're going to definitely do that. So I hope that helps you a little bit, Andrew, with this decision. But go ahead, Brian.
If this motion fails and it comes back to the other option again, we can also ask whichever candidates or whichever firm we have to make the same accommodations and to tailor it more towards us. So while obviously the first one gave an indication where people are at, there's a possibility this could still fail and we could come back and bring up those same questions and concerns and issues with a firm that's half the price and has familiarity with our state and our district.
Well, we have now eliminated. Okay,
no,
expand on that.
What we did following Robert's rules is that we voted down that motion.
Okay.
And just like this motion could fail, it can be reintroduced, because if someone switches their mind, then what we've done is said no. So that motion failed. And I'm assuming it could be reintroduced if this one fails as well, because that otherwise we would be stuck with our third choice on that. So.
Okay. Go ahead, James.
And so it's come up a couple times, that the difference in price and it being substantial. If I remember from my notes correctly, two of the three firms would create the necessary flyers and marketing pieces in WASB. I think put it on us to create the pieces. So when you start identifying the differences in services provided, there is value that is being accounted for in that amount. Go ahead.
On page 14, the vacancy notes and electronic brochure we create for you are designed to attract candidates interested in joining your community. So they would be creating the same thing. Oh, sorry.
That was contrary to what they said in the meeting. So I appreciate that.
All right. Any further discussion?
Does any member have any, for some reason I had listed BWP and Associates as having a 2 on their stakeholder input process. Does anyone have anything different or that stood out for them? In particular, whoever's supporting this that could change my mind on their stakeholder input process and why they stood out for you?
Oh, and I'm just going back to what Nancy said, and I had just made a note of it too, specifically that they do the interviews individually with each board member. I gave them a 4 on the stakeholder input. So, and I'm going through my notes. We got a lot of stuff, but I specifically had called that out.
I do like the individual board member interviews quite a lot. I think that's a really good idea. So go ahead, James.
I rate them as just meeting expectations in that regard. I didn't see anything that stood out, but nor did I see a deficiency. It felt like the processes to get to know the community and get to know our needs were pretty standardized services. The only one I actually gave not meeting expectations was the third one, because they time boxed that activity and it felt like to 2 days. And it felt like that we would probably have to be asking them for additional services there.
All right. Anything at all that you'd like to add to the discussion? Now's your chance. All right. I think we're ready to vote. Kinsey?
Online voting is now open. All votes have been entered and the motion has carried. The results of the individual board member votes are as follows. Smith, yes. Becker, no. McCoy, yes. Leighton and Warren, yes. Welch, yes. Lyerly, yes. Mills, no.
Okay, motion carries. I'm not exactly sure what the next step is, but as far as engaging with the company, Melissa will take it the next step from you, Melissa, to finalize and to talk about contracts, et cetera. All right, guys. Good discussion. So we're going to move on to the next agenda item, which is the proposed 2022-23 budget. Yes. We're going to start with a motion and a second, which is part of the process. I'll make the motion. I move that the 2022-23 budget as presented / modified be approved.
Second.
Now, this is not the final vote on this budget. This is just the starting of the process. And so we're joined by Sarah and Angie, and they're going to take us through a slide deck, and then we can have further discussion later. So welcome.
Thank you. Kinsey's going to get that up. Okay, good. I think I can see it from here. Sure I can. So good evening. I'm Angie Robley, Chief Financial Officer for the Green Bay School District, and sitting next to me is Sarah Noah, the Executive Director of Finance. So tonight we'll be giving you an overview of the 22-23 budget. This is a first of many challenging budgets, I feel, in the next couple of years, just based on some of the factors that we're facing, which include declining enrollment, inflation, the one-time funding that we have for the next couple of years, and then also the uncertainty that's surrounding us with the next state biennium budget. We don't know how that's going to affect school districts and funding. So first slide, this is just showing us the timeline. So we're here tonight to propose to you the budget, but again, we'll be back in a couple of weeks. We'll hold that public hearing, and then the board will be asked to vote on that final budget and adopt it. And then also we'll be voting on 2 different levies dependent upon the referendum results. Next slide, please. So the mission statement is we educate all students to be college, career, and community ready, inspired to succeed in our diverse world. So the purpose of the meeting, per Wisconsin statute 65.90, that's why we're here today. We formulated a budget, we'll review it and propose it, and then we'll hold that public hearing and we'll adopt and certify a budget along with the levy on the 24th of October.
So our agenda for tonight, we'll start by addressing important factors in the budget process, which will include an overview of the revenue limit formula and an updated student membership third Friday count. We'll also discuss our mill rate proposal and how it relates to property valuation. And then finally, we'll discuss a budget summary and the largest funds, Fund 10 and Fund 27, and then just briefly touch on all of the other funds. As you know, we're in the second year of the state biennium budget. Both our categorical and per pupil aid has remained frozen for the 22-23 school year. ESSER funds continue to be an important factor in the budget, with $12.5 million being budgeted for operations as well as other eligible expenses.
So the revenue limit formula, this is something that I feel is so important to ingrain, because this is basically 80% of our general funds revenue is derived from this revenue limit formula and control that the state has on school district funding. So the formula is revenue limit authority minus state aid equals property taxes. So an important note, if nothing else, an important takeaway is that there's an inverse relationship between the two. So state aid and property taxes. So when we receive more of one, we'll receive less of the other, with the point being that that revenue limit authority stays the same. Okay, so state aid plus property taxes equals the revenue that's coming into the district. So when we look at that equalized aid number of 182.3 million, that is up from last year, 8.9 million. So with that being said, the property taxes are down over 10 million from last year at 53 million. But again, that 237 million has decreased slightly, about $2 million from the prior year. We have estimated behind equalized aid and behind that property taxes, because we won't get our equalized aid certified number from the state until this Friday. So when we come back on the 24th, we'll have those final numbers, but it will be a minimal adjustment. We feel confident in these numbers and these estimates, so it won't be anything that's shocking. So speaking of important factors in the budget, so this is a graph of our September membership FTE count. This is one of the main drivers in our revenue limit formula. So that's what's driving that $237 million. So as we continue to see our enrollment declining, that just means that we're receiving less revenue into the general fund, meaning that we've got less money to spend on operations and in the classroom. So we are down 285 FTE from last year. Although that's not great news, that is what we are expecting, and that's what we had projected in our budget model. So we had projected a decline in 250 FTE, and it's a little bit more than that. So again, not great news, but not shocking. Also to note that Green Bay is not alone in declining enrollment. We are seeing this across the state with a lot of other districts, and it's a nationwide problem as well. So we aren't alone in this declining enrollment environment.
It's important to note that there's a difference in fair market value and assessed value. I know I've been here before with this, but just to elaborate, fair market value is value. It's determined by the state, and it is determined annually for every property located in the state, and therefore every property in the district. That's what the district uses to calculate its mill rate. The assessed value is determined by each municipality, as noticed in the reassessment letters that came out in some of the municipalities recently. That happens upon the revaluation of any or all properties, and that's what the municipalities use to set their mill rate. It's important to note that when we send over our levy based on fair market value, the municipalities do a calculation to convert that to assessed value rate, and that's the total rate that shows up on the tax bill. The average increase in fair market value in the district this year was 14.36%. As I'm sure you're aware, that's a very large increase compared to previous years. This does mean that the district has more value over which to spread its levy, and that works to drive down the mill rate even further.
So as we are all aware, the district will be seeking approval for a $92.6 million capital referendum in November. And with that, the proposed mill rate with the passage of the referendum is $8 per 1,000 of fair market value. So what this means is that is a 13% decrease, or $1.03 decrease from last year's mill rate, which is significant. Regardless, if the passage of the referendum does not happen, then our mill rate will drop to $4.59. But regardless of whether we pass or don't pass, the mill rate that the district is proposing is the lowest that we've seen in decades.
Page 11 in the budget book starts with Fund 10, which is, of course, the general fund. That is presented as a balanced budget with revenues and expenses of approximately $296.3 million. Revenues include the $12.5 million in ESSER funding that I mentioned earlier, which will be used to support operations and other allowable expenditures. Also included is the state equalized aid that Angie touched on, $183.5 million, and then one-time rescue funds or relief funds from the governor's office of $1.9 million. As Angie mentioned earlier as well, 80% of the revenues that come into the district are determined by the revenue limit calculation, which means we have very little control over that amount or those revenues.
So switching gears a little bit. So now we're in general fund expenditures. First of all, the budget includes a 4.7% increase in salaries, but despite with that increase in the budget, when you look at the salaries and benefits for the general fund overall, we have decreased that by $4 million, which is the result of staffing reductions through attrition. So the district, from this point, comparable to last year at the same point of time, we have reduced staff by 105 FTE, or what that means is full-time equivalent employee. And what we're doing is, this is an effort to address that fiscal cliff that we've been talking about, that that the district faces in 24-25 after those ESSER funds are depleted. So with this effort, that's across all employee groups, including administration, were those reductions. So what we're trying to do, or the strategy that the district is taking, is to get those staffing levels back to pre-pandemic staffing levels, and then starting to align the staffing levels with the current district enrollment as we see that decline. So kind of getting those trend lines, if you remember the graphs that we've shown in the past, to get those lines to start coming together instead of far apart, which will address that fiscal cliff and that budget deficit in 24-25. So then the pink triangle in the pie chart up in the slides, so the operating transfer of 11.24%, that is the $33.3 million that we've set aside to transfer over to the special education fund. I also want to highlight contracted services, because the green triangle is also significant. About 20% is allocated to contracted services, but there are some very large numbers that are included in the $57.6 million. And those include our open enrollment number of $18.6 million. Those are resident students who open enroll out to other districts. Also included in this category are the private school vouchers, which we have budgeted $9.3 million this year. That number is an estimate. We will get those numbers also from the state on Friday. So then we'll present to the board what those numbers come in at on the 24th at the public hearing. And then also included here is our transportation costs. So once you add those up, then you're left with contracted service at about $20 million. So speaking of the special education fund, despite our declining enrollment overall, special education students continue to rise. So as we all know, the cost to educate these students is higher. So when you look at the special education fund and their budget, this year it's at $54.4 million. In comparison, last year it was $2.2 million less than that. So the fund has increased. The major revenues, there's three sources that come into Fund 27. The biggest one by far, that 61%, is the transfer that we just discussed of $33.3 million coming in from Fund 10. The 26% is coming from state grants, most of that being the categorical aid that we receive. So aidable expenditures, basically we take last year's aidable expenditures for Fund 27 and we apply that percentage that's given by the state. That has not increased that much from 29.5%. We're estimating that that aidable category to be 29.9%. And then the rest is coming in from federal grants and Medicaid reimbursement.
Page 25 in the budget book starts all other funds. They're listed here. I did want to touch briefly on the Community Service Fund, or Fund 80. That fund has revenues of $2.7 million, which is consistent with prior years. However, we are planning on spending down some of the fund balance, about $350,000 in that fund, due to one after-school program that has no longer been covered by the grant. Total expenditures for all funds are just over $373 million. If you remember last year, that number was just over $400 million. The reason for the decrease is, of course, we're out of debt. So there's no debt service budgeted and there are no capital projects in this budget. All right. Thank you, guys. It's a lot to take in. I know you guys have spent weeks and weeks on this, preparing this budget for our district. And I just want to thank you. Do we have any questions? Go ahead.
When you said that there were a reduction of 105 people, do you have a breakdown like admin and teachers and paras and things like that?
I do have it, but I don't have it with me, Nancy, but I can forward it to the board. I think it was, I'm confident in saying, I think it was 74.9 teachers, 13 administrative positions, and then I would have to look at the rest because it's kind of shuffled around from the other groups. But those are the major groups. Mm-hmm.
James?
So given that decrease in FTE count, I see a kind of a decrease in the 2023 budget for salaries. I do not see any kind of decrease in the benefits budget 23 to 22. Is there an explanation for that?
Sure. What page are you on, James? Here we go. I got it, I think.
There are no page numbers in the book. Oh yes, it's 17. Sorry. My hand was over it. I was like,
that's a problem, right? Like, haha, that's funny. Good joke. So there's a couple explanations. So health insurance, there's a slight decrease in health insurance. The big hitter here is the emeritus fund. So if you see last year was 4.7 million, there is $3 million built into that emeritus account to be transferred over to our Fund 73. So if you pull that out, then, you'll be back to where those benefits are then in line with the decrease in salaries.
Thank you. And I just have one more thing.
Go ahead,
So
James.
just making sure I'm reading this right. Our total levy, if you remove the debt service of the proposed referendum, we're going to levy about what, 54 million? Is that so? It's basically the levy covers special ed. Is that a fair assessment?
So property taxes is what you're talking, right? So yes. So the property taxes that we are estimating is 53 million. So that is right. You're right. Sorry. Yes. So the property taxes that we're collecting, you threw me a little bit about the levy, but yes, the property taxes are a little bit less than what our overall Fund 27 budget is at 54.4 million.
Go ahead, Brian.
When you spoke of transportation services, the 7.2 million, that's overall, that's daily bus services. Does that also include field trips, things like that as well?
Yes, it includes all of that. And then there's a separate transportation budget that is captured in Fund 27 as well.
A follow-up with that. Do we have a breakdown as far as we'd spoken earlier at a different meeting about transportation for students receiving to private schools in the area, and an estimated cost? Do we know what that is?
I do not know what that cost is, but I could reach out to Chad, who is the transportation director, and get that breakdown if that's available. So we can get back to you on that.
Anybody else? Andrew, did you have any questions?
I don't. I think we have enough. I think this is a good budget. We have the ESSER funds still left. I will maintain what I've said in every board meeting, that I absolutely would go to fund balance before I would go to cuts that make a substantial day-to-day change in the experience that our students and families have here. But I don't believe we're at that point. And I think I think this works for this year, and we're just, the state's insistence on not having any inflationary increase over the years is alarming, and it is out of touch with reality. And so hopefully something will happen on the state level, because it has to for school districts in Wisconsin to function. But as far as this school year, this is a good budget that I'm able to support.
Brian?
I just wanted to clarify when I asked the transportation question, because I kind of threw in a thing at the end asking about field trips. I'm assuming field trips are a different line item, that this is our daily transportation to and from school for students.
Yes, a lot of those field trips are actually would be found in Fund 21. Yep.
All right. Anybody else? Every time we talk about the budget and we see numbers like this, if you don't work in public education, those numbers are going to be startling. They're huge. But this is what it costs to provide educational services for roughly 20,000 students. And these are the numbers that we must make peace with. So, go ahead, Brian.
When we're talking about FTEs, does the state still use a 3-year rolling average, or have they changed it to a 5-year rolling average?
It's still a 3-year rolling average. So last year, actually, not to get too far into the weeds, but because we had such a robust summer school program, that actually increased our FTE total for that year, but now it's starting to decrease again. So yes, it's a 3-year rolling average. So it does kind of flatten. It's not as drastic, because we get an exemption for declining enrollment on the revenue limit.
As a follow-up with the summer school discussion, was there a change in policies in recent years as far as how that counts towards our enrollment numbers? Because I know that there's been a shift in offerings for summer school. And I was just curious if there's been some sort of change in the formula as far as how that counts for revenue.
The formula has stayed the same, so it's based on minutes, and then that converts into, I believe it's about 21,000 minutes per FTE. This year, we came in at 449 FTE for summer school. In comparison to last year was 908. But the good news and the positive news is that pre-pandemic, we were coming in at about 300. I think it's been around 300, 310 FTE. So we have captured more FTE this last year. So if we can continue doing that, that's an increase in FTE overall for the revenue limit, which is good news.
I think everyone are finished with questions. Thank you, guys. Okay, that completes our. Oh, I'm sorry. We do have to vote. Thank you.
Online voting is now open.
Just to be clear, this is not the final vote on this budget.
All votes have been entered and the motion has carried with all board members voting in favor.
There, now I think we're done with this meeting. I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Can I have a second?
Second.
Second.
There we go. Whoa. Okay. All in favor?
Aye.
Opposed?
Right.
Okay, we're adjourned. We are going to take a 5-minute break and then we're going to restart with a new meeting in 5 minutes. Is that okay? Yeah. Okay, welcome back, everybody, to our work session for Monday, October 10, 2022. We are going to start with roll call. Kinsey?
Smith? Here. Becker?
Here.
McCoy?
Here.
Leighton and Warren?
Here.
Welch?
Here.
Lyerly?
Here.
Mills?
Here.
Okay. All board members are present. Andrew Becker is attending remotely. We are joined by our interim superintendent, Vicki Byer, and members of her cabinet. And we also are joined by 2 intercity student council members. I'm going to give them a chance to go ahead and introduce themselves.
My name is Macy Saha. I'm a senior at Preble, and I am the president of Intracity Student Council.
My name is Viva Winkler. I'm a junior at Southwest High School and I am the secretary.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Okay, we're next on our agenda is the public forum, and we have one speaker, Mike Blecka. You have 5 minutes if you'll state your name and address. Oh, we're going to get you a microphone, Mike. If you'll state your name and address, and you have 5 minutes to.
Yes, good evening, board members and staff. Thank you for the opportunity to be here. I am Mike Blecka, 160 West Briar Lane, Green Bay. And I have a statement to read into the record regarding the referendum. Dear community members, as former members of the Green Bay Area Board of Education, we are encouraging support for the $92.6 million school referendum on the November 8th ballot. Voters in the Green Bay Area School District will be asked to approve spending for the following: $43.4 million for delayed facility projects, energy efficiency, and student and community safety. $48 million for secondary school upgrades. $1.2 million for playground improvements. Throughout our own service on the school board, we, along with our administrative and teaching staffs, work diligently to provide the best educational opportunities possible for our students while mindful of the financial demands placed on our taxpayers. We believe this referendum does that. The school district will be paying off enough existing debt to allow a decrease in the tax rate for school purposes, even if this referendum passes. More information on the referendum can be found at gbaps.org/referendum 2022. Please consider a yes vote on the November 8th referendum. Sincerely, Mike Blecka, Brenda Warren, Katie Maloney, Jean Marsh, Dottie Jenks, Judy DeClean, and Judy Crane. Thank you.
Thank you, Mike. Okay,
Did the district want a copy?
that'd be great. Okay, next up we have policy 893. I think we're going to be joined by Melissa. Oh, yeah. Who's policy and governance? Sorry, Laura. You go ahead. Sorry.
No problems. Well, I'll just introduce our attorney. Melissa Collar will go over the policy for us.
Thank you. Tonight you have pretty substantial revisions to policy and rule 893, which deal with outside researchers and using the district to conduct educational research. This policy was brought forward by Interim Deputy Superintendent Dr. Judy Wiegand in response to some changes within the district administration and the elimination of the position that was in charge of research. We took a look at a number of different sample policies throughout the entire United States, especially larger school districts that have policies with respect to educational research to determine how best to approach the topic. I know in my 11 years here at the district that we have had some feedback from outside researchers and regarding our process, things that worked well and things that didn't work so well. So we also took into account that feedback in crafting a new policy. Once we got a policy draft, it was brought to the district's cabinet, who would be working with those researchers in their various departments, including our schools, the leadership for our schools, and feedback was given, and then this draft was then produced for your consideration tonight. Oh, I think there's one question.
James.
I just want to confirm that in definitions to item B, that you intend the double negative.
Yes, we intend the double negative. Someone else phrased that as well.
Anyone else? And just a reminder that we don't take any action on this evening, so we have time to review, and we will at the regular board meeting later this month when we take official action. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, next is education. Andrew, do you want me to go ahead and handle that?
Yes, please. It's I think we've determined it's too difficult remotely to see all the who's doing what. So thank you.
Okay. So we'll move on to number 4 under education. A is the 4K and secondary assessment task force update. And we'll be joined by what's that? Yeah, Dr. Chartier, I'll let you introduce your people, Nancy. Okay. Well, thank you very much for the opportunity to bring our, I almost want to say a final recommendation. This is, we started with the K-5 assessment project that you set forth for us. And with just a quick review, the board did request that we did a thorough evaluation of our assessment system and to reduce the number of assessments to only reflect those that are required by state or federal law. Also for those that we have to have in place in order to secure financial resources. And last but not least, to monitor student learning toward meeting the grade level standards. What I'd like to do, this is really a different kind of flow because we're going to be discussing first representing our 4K assessments, and then we'll move into our secondary assessments. And I have very talented individuals here tonight that have volunteered to share with you the experience that they went through at each of these levels. And please note, Jess will also, I'm going to ask you all to introduce yourselves too before you speak. We have a few educators that are joining us virtually. So it's all yours, Jess.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here tonight. I'm Jess Vanden Heuvel. I'm assessment coordinator for the district, and I worked with the 4K task force over the beginning of the school year. And joining us on the call tonight are Emily Drain and Jenny Ullman, 4K teacher representatives from that task force. So our task force convened twice in September. We had a good sized group, about 12 teacher representatives, to review the assessments that we had been using in 4K previously, and to review survey results that teachers had submitted regarding their thoughts on the assessments. And then the task force team were able to discuss which assessments would be brought forward. And Emily and Jenny, I don't know if either of you would like to jump in here and talk about the experiences and the discussions that were had at some of the last meeting that we did together as a task force.
Okay, I'll jump in. I guess the last meeting we went through, as Nancy was saying, like what was required for the grants and things like that for the district, what the district needed for the 4K assessments. And then we went through as teachers what our experiences were with each of the assessments, and what we thought was absolutely necessary to continue reporting out, and what things we thought could be eliminated. So there were a couple categories that we looked at where we decided there were a few areas that we thought we could stop reporting out on, not necessarily stop teaching or stop gathering that information for ourselves as teachers, but things that maybe the district doesn't need to be reported back on. So they were pretty unanimously voted on by the teachers that were in the task force to which ones to keep and which ones to take away.
And then I can take it from there, Emily. After we came up with our recommendations, then last Friday we had an all PK virtual meeting and brought forward what the recommendations were. And then they also had a survey whether they agreed on those recommendations.
And the results from that survey were that 88.6% of the teachers agreed to the recommendations brought forth by the task force.
Going to say, do we want to address questions for the 4K piece of this first? Because it's the whole process is just a little bit different when we get into our secondary assessments. All right, so please feel free to ask those that are representing 4K any questions you might have. Sure. Okay.
I was just wondering if we could, like we see just this little part right here. I would like to see the list of all the ones that they are giving though, like all the ones that are required, all of everything, like when we first started having it, we had everything. Do you know what I'm asking for?
Yep. What you see in your memo here is on the recommended side. That's everything that we're bringing forward. And then removed was quite a lot of the data entry for some of those pieces. We have a streamlined surface for that now. And then also the concepts about print and rhyme continue to be taught, like Emily had said, collected for instructional purposes, but not reported on.
So there's not any state required testing and things like that.
There are the reading readiness reporting. Yes.
Then how about the state, and is there a federal, or is this part of it?
Yeah, this is all part of it in the grants too. Mhm.
So just like our K2 foundational assessments, the state assessment screener for early literacy is pre-K2. And so they really worked off of what kindergarten had done. And then, but they have minimal assessments. Now, Teaching Strategies Gold, they use as part of their program, may for Head Start use as part of their program, but it's not a requirement of the universal interim assessments that you asked us to bring forward. Does that make sense?
But in fact, the Head Start and 4K have different testing requirements.
Correct. So, and that is one change that was made. Previously, all 4K gave administered Teaching Strategies Goal. Now the only required 4-year-old programs that need to give Teaching Strategies Gold, because they are in a Head Start grant and they need that data, would be those related to Head Start. So all the other 4K programs that are in our schools would only be responsible for the foundational literacy assessments that are presented here tonight. You bet. Anybody else? Okay. Okay, so next I'd like to make the shift to Blair, if you'd please introduce yourself and just share with everyone your experience. Blair at the time was working with our committee in middle school, and he was a 7th grade teacher at Blair, and at Red Smith. And I'm going to let Blair mention his change in his position this year, and then the actual experience he had going through as a teacher. Sorry, Blair.
Okay, so yes, I'm Blair Swakatowski. I am currently serving as a curriculum resource implementation specialist with the district. So I'm supporting the implementation of our math resource, K8. But serving on this task force, I was a 7th grade math teacher. And if it's okay, I just kind of wanted to back it up a sec and give you some background on the assessment, the interim assessment that had been created for specifically math, because that was my area of expertise. But we had met over the last 2 years to create our interim assessment, where we identified 12 major standards in our math courses. And then we utilized resources like the ACT Aspire exemplar questions, forward exemplar questions, to create those interim assessments so that we knew that they were going to meet all of our stakeholders' needs. And so then, being a part of this task force, we were able to come in and say, you know, we've got these 3 interim assessments that we've been working for 2 years, and we know that they're meeting our needs. So it was easy to kind of to go through this process and with the lens of, are we meeting all of our stakeholders' needs? Does that work?
Okay, so it says in here, like, the interim assessment work as part of the secondary curriculum. Is this what we're talking about?
Yes.
So it says that it has been in progress for 2.5 years. Like, does this have an end date?
As far as the interim assessments go, that's something that we jury on a yearly basis.
And, okay, sorry, go ahead. That was another question I had. Staff members and administrators will be encouraged to use the jury process. Could you tell me about that?
So we meet every summer as a math team. Those we're all invited to it, and those that attend are the ones that are a part of those during meetings, where we look at things like the interim assessments, the district CEDs, things like that to update them if we need to. We utilize the data that we found from previous interim assessments to kind of help us to guide those conversations.
So the jurying process is just getting together and discussing. I thought there, okay. What?
Actually, then there are times, and then we use a jury process for all of our curriculum and our assessment process to keep it as a living document. And as teachers use both of those entities, like Blair had shared, they can bring back meaningful information based on the data they collected or teaching the curriculum. They'll come back with recommendations, especially the way that the way the students actually responded to the curriculum as they had written it the first time. So what happens, Ms. Welsh, to that is if a recommendation, we make the changes from the committee in our content essential learnings. If the recommendations alter the meaning of what the board has adopted as our essential learnings, then they would be brought back to the board. Typically, they've been, I guess in our world, we call it tweaked. So they really didn't, it was just a better way of either gathering or teaching the information for students or collecting the data, which really is under the teacher's realm. But if they change the content, the meaning, the learning expectations, then we would have to bring those back to the board. And we'd be bringing those back to the board the first meeting in September, I believe we meet with our curriculum.
Would this be too hard to ask for an example of that? Like, can you think of a time when you were doing the jury thing where you said, this really doesn't work and we're going to do this or that, or where there's some changes?
So I'm not sure that I can give you a very specific example, but those are some difficult conversations that I've been a part of every summer where, you know, we talk about those interim assessments and, you know, okay, this question, everybody got this one wrong. Why do we think that? And so we dig into that and think about what issues there could have been and to determine if a change could and should be made to that for the following year.
So it's basically looking at your assessments and see where the problems are on those assessments. Okay, thank you.
Are there any other questions at this point? Okay.
Thank you, Blair. Next, I'm going to pass it off to Dan, who is an administrator who, as we had mentioned, it was difficult to write this because one project at middle school, depending on the content area, had been in progress for 2 years, where Dr. Wiegand and I were leading a whole broader scope of work at the secondary level around curriculum writing, identifying the power standards, and then the development of assessments that measured the expectations of those power standards. And when the board brought it forward, I believe I had mentioned this in a previous meeting, so I'll be short. In a previous meeting, I had mentioned that we were having an August 8th retreat because this work needed to continue. At this point, at the point when the ask was of reviewing our assessments, our secondary didn't have any assessments to review. So we knew we needed the assessments because they help us to know during the learning process if students are making progress. So we're not surprised at the end when we have a state assessment as to what our growth rate is or what students are learning, if they're learning or not learning. So we can actually make adjustments. I should say the teachers can make adjustments to the students' response to their learning at that time. So that's why it's 2.5. because we've been working on it for a while. And I do want to thank you for allowing us to just continue the work that was already in progress, because it was really a well-worked system that Dan's going to tell us about now.
Yeah, thanks, Nancy. Dan Sloy, principal at Edison Middle School. The process did start on August 8th for us for our interim assessment when it came to literacy and the reading and writing. There was a team that came together on that August 8th, and the next week we met and with a larger team, inviting all the middle school principals and additional representatives, because we just didn't feel real comfortable with the decisions that were made. And we also want to make sure there were more people around the table. So we met on August 15th, and through that process, they had some clarifying questions. So I had a meeting set up with Nancy and Linda Teskey, and I got some questions answered for that team. That team got back together again in early September. And then we were given some choices on what that would look like. And that team came up with some decisions. So there's about 8 meetings with a lot of representatives around the table and some choice. So the decision was made. All of the assessments will be taken in NICU. The writing assessments, the reason we didn't feel real comfortable, they felt like we didn't feel there wasn't a flow to it. So as a result, there were some adjustments made to the timeline so it would naturally fit in the curriculum and the assessments for writing that were already being given by the teachers. And those assessments naturally fit in the teachers' college curriculum. So it just made sense to everyone involved to have that fit. So we appreciated the flexibility and the choice that team was given. I know they felt that appreciation. And then as far as reading, that assessment also is being created in NICU, where students will be taking that on a regular basis 3 times throughout the year. So that in a nutshell is kind of the decisions that we have made, but and then the scale score will be reported, and NICU will formulate that for the district.
Correct. And then NICU, as we know, actually gets fed up to the results get fed up to Infinite Campus, our student information system, and then all of our interim assessments now will then be fed up to Panorama. So we'll have all our state assessments, all our interim assessments, and much, much more. But that's what we'll have put in the interim assessments, whereas really the driving factor to have the interim assessments as well as the state assessments in our first run through with Panorama. So it's getting our resources into that Panorama platform so that we can start analyzing and do some comparative work and really progress monitoring of student learning. I'll field any additional questions that you might have at this time. Go ahead.
So it's IQ that they take the test on? NICU. Okay, do they do the writing on that as well, or just the reading?
They do both the writing and reading on that. We're working through the strategies that students can use, because they will, just like when they take the forward exam, there's opportunities for them to do some writing on the side to outline different things that they may want to do. But it is going to be done in NICU, yes.
So then is there any teacher correcting of the writing and all of that?
Yes, they just, as they always have, assessed the writing. They will do it. However, now they'll do it in NICU. And Linda and the team is working on putting that in place so that it can be scored right there, and the rubric is right there, so the teachers can score it right on NICU. So it'll formulate that final scale score for them. So it's been so user friendly, and we're working. That's our goal, is to make it user friendly for our teachers, but also for our students to get an experience similar to when they take other state exams.
Nancy, what was eliminated from that, in the past, they would have to enter that into TSAR. So having them take the assessment in NICU and then just score it on NICU, that'll get pulled into our student information system.
When I was teaching language arts in 6th grade, it took like about a week to get everybody to have, go through all the processes of writing and stuff. Is that still or is it like a day or 2 days?
These are the on-demand writings that the students have. So it's a one-day opportunity for them to show their growth and their learning.
I would just, if no one else has any questions, I really would like to thank all of the teachers, all the administrators that really worked as a unified team to take a look at our assessments. This was, and thank you to the Board of Education who put this in front of us. This is the first time in my 9 years in Green Bay that we have taken our assessment system and really with a fine-tooth comb went through it, bearing on 3 filters, right? State, federal, what we need for grants, and then we owe it to the community and to the Board of Education to show that our students are making progress during the school year. So with that being said, I don't believe there's anyone that we worked with that didn't walk away and say, wow, that was not only great dialogue, but we really learned more about not only our educators, their viewpoint, what was the cumbersome parts. You know, it came down, not necessarily was it the assessments. And in our one survey we gave, the teachers didn't really want the assessments to go. You mean we can't give? No, as an educator, you can give any assessment you want. These will be the only ones that will be fed up. And in conclusion, I would like to say that no less than 2 times a year, teaching and learning department representatives will come forward to the board and give you an update on our balanced assessment system, as well as when we were in the middle of 2 adoption cycles now, as far as our curriculum, when we come forward with an adoption of a new resource and we talk about the content essential learnings and the new resource, we also will be having a paragraph and dialogue around the changes to the assessments with the new adoption. What's going, what's staying, so on and so forth. So that's kind of that. Someone asked, does this ever end? It doesn't ever end. It really is a reoccurring, but we want to make sure that we also keep the public informed of the assessment system we use in the district.
James.
So the twice a year update, that's just on the process. Do you bring forward and make transparent to the board the actual progress data? Absolutely.
So kind of twofold will come to the board. During the curriculum adoption process, the representatives from that content area will be sharing with the board the assessment changes to the assessments that may have been in place, but with the new resource, they make changes that are, shall I say, much like they did with the writing, more applicable to being given the assessment when it's right for the next learning or the teacher's teaching versus a date on a calendar. And then the other piece would be just to bring forward to the board, absolutely part of that progress will be any feed forward that we've had from our teachers using the assessments and moving them forward. We can share out what we learned in a jury to have a little more in our jury sessions, to have a little more detail around the most current assessments so they're relevant for everyone. But absolutely, we'll definitely be bringing that information forward.
Anybody else? Andrew, did you have any questions? Okay. I have a question for Mr. Slowey. I'm going to put you on the spot. Sorry to do this. How does this work benefit?
I'm sorry, I was trying to be recognized, so I was on mute accidentally, and before that before that it wasn't working. You didn't see my hand. Anyways, could I just get some clarification? I wasn't sure at the what was their disagreement on that caused the group to reconvene and change something? I wasn't really clear on that.
Yeah, our initial meeting, Andrew, the initial meeting that we had, we were trying to meet dates versus when it naturally occurred in the curriculum. So when we went back to a larger group and brought that information, we had some really great dialogue around that. And that's when I went back and had a conversation with Nancy, Linda, and at some point Cindy as well, regarding can we so we're not just meeting the dates, we're meeting when the learning is naturally occurring for our students. So when we went back to the team, the district team, they were all in, and it just needs to make sense. So we were appreciative of that. Does that make sense, Andrew?
So we're just talking about changing of dates, not substantive changes in what assessments are being done?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Yep.
All right, we're going to have another go at this. How does this work improve the life of your teachers in your school? Because that's where this started, is what can we do to lighten the load on teachers? And at that time, we were very much in the throes of the pandemic.
Yeah, what I appreciate about it is kind of Andrew's question right there. When we went back to more of the team members, it just didn't make sense. And that's why now it's going to naturally occur. These are assessments they're already giving, those on demands. We put it in NICU. So we're hoping that well, we know the scoring, and as we shared earlier, less input for the teachers, and it should be much more user friendly. One of the things about this, though, is with Teachers College, our teachers know their writers and readers because of the conferring they do on a regular basis with them to know where they're at. So they pretty much should know, even before this assessment's given, where their students are at. So I believe, to answer your question, us allowing that to naturally occur throughout the year makes it easier, because these are assessments, the writing ones, that we are already giving at the middle school level.
Thank you. Are there any more questions? Do you guys have anything else? Okay, thank you very much. Okay, next on the agenda under education is B, Equity, Diversity, Inclusion Task Force recommendations. And we're going to be joined by Claudia, Katie, Judy. Okay.
This item had been tabled from the last meeting, so we're bringing it back to the board to make sure we're able to respond to any questions that might still remain.
Okay. I don't have any questions, but please, anybody else? Go ahead, Nancy.
Okay, so these are the core things. These are the core things that we want to achieve. So now, in the next steps, do you have things in mind that, like, is it going to be another program that the teachers are going to be using? Another day of professional development? How is that going to move on and look?
At this time, we are looking at, there's like a two-step process that has to occur after this. First of all, it's to look at our action steps. To look at our goals. Our goals. What goals do we want to achieve? And then develop action steps around those. I don't know that would include another program, so to speak, because we have to look at being fiscally responsible too. And look at what are the things that we can accomplish easily, as to what we can accomplish that's going to take a longer time. Okay, do you have anything to add?
No. James?
So I recognize that I'm the person that put the motion forward to table this, and so that I could ask some questions. In full transparency, since that time, I've had a couple of different conversations with administrative staff, and most of my concerns have been addressed in this. But as I understand, where I got confused was when presented the working papers, there was a very large diversity plan that had been ongoing, and they had 31 pages of different tasks, either accomplished, ongoing, done annually. And I had a hard time connecting the dots, right? Because there was the key differentiator, key influencer document, where you had the problem statement, the key influencers of why that problem exists, and then you aggregated them into these core principles or right commitments. So I was trying to take that and relate that to the pre-existing diversity plan and got lost, right? Because it seemed like there was a huge overlap and that you kind of were starting over. Now, based on some conversations that I've had, I do believe you're kind of starting over, right? You're taking this and saying, we have this large comprehensive plan, a pandemic happened, and it's time to reassess. So I kind of see this as a, start, stop, continue exercise of looking at the previous plan and trying to identify those things that actually returned some investment, made some changes in performance, and only adopt and continue those and potentially add other initiatives. But do I have a better understanding of what I'm about to next 2 weeks take a vote on? Because I was very concerned that I'm a board member that was not here when this started, and I needed to make sure that I understood what I was about to do. So am I on point, a little off?
I think you're right on point. And, I appreciate the fact that we had this opportunity to bring this back, because as a governance board, making sure that you are voting on something that, and we just had the conversation on the assessment task force. What if you vote on this to approve it, but it results in additional assessments, or maybe it is a connection with a budgetary piece. And here you are trying to address budgetary items as well. So I think it's really important as we continue to move forward to make sure that you are kept informed on those different components, right? Makes perfect sense.
Just to follow up, because that's where I was going to go next, right? Because now we're back at the beginning, and I don't know how the previous diversity plan started, but it became big, right? And very comprehensive. And it didn't look like there were any kind of economic guardrails around it to determine if this was an expensive in terms of FTE counts and administrator time and activities, because in that plan is not the mention of actual additional teaching moments, right? It's everything around it. So as you go forward, you use the term keep us informed. So the question I have for you is really that the relationship between the board and this task force, or are there other milestones where you'll come back and say, all right, here's a business case, right? We want to add these tasks. It may manifest as additional line items on someone's job description or something. But as we look at this, how do we keep it from growing into something that if I look at the final product, I might not agree with its breadth or its impact financially or otherwise to the district?
Generally, when it's after the governance question is approved, we would bring back yearly, at least yearly, to you where we're at and what we're planning to do. If you're asking for us to do that more often, we can do that. I do want you all to know that because we've been recognized as a school district that's been disproportionately, so we have disproportionality in suspensions, we have disproportionality in grades, and we have disproportionality in the identification of students with emotional behavioral disabilities by certain races. And because of that, the Department of Public Instruction is mandating that we utilize a portion of our special education IDA funds to offset that and to come up with a plan, which we'll be embedding into this thing, into the plan, the current plan, but recognize that that comes with a lot of money. So we would not be needing at this particular time additional funds from the board or from the district, to provide any additional professional learning or any of that. If we were to, I don't know, Vicki, if we would ask the board, do we ask the board about if it was a big financial number, but we don't generally ask the board, do we?
Yeah, if it were a large amount, that's correct. And it's something we've talked about in this whole process too, that I think it's always important to remind the board. We have a system in place now when decisions are being made. It's not just in isolation. There's voice from all of the stakeholders and the different departments to ensure, including the finance department, can we even afford it? So the next step is to start taking a look at goals and action plans. And that would be something we would share with the Board of Education. But again, it's not in isolation.
Oh, go ahead.
So just to follow up, I don't know, but like the assessment presentation that we received, I would prefer not on an annual basis, but when it makes sense to come back. And when we hit these milestones of, okay, I've got some action items, whatever, giving us information just in time.
I would agree that once a year on this is probably not enough. It's very important work, and it represents a huge commitment of time and resources from our staff. So more regular updates, I think, would be very welcome. So go ahead, Brian.
Would establishment and you were talking about disproportionality as far as within special education services and other indicators, would this open up the possibility of increased funding through either grants or other partnerships with groups throughout the country by us taking this stance? Does that help us qualify for any more grants, whether it's through DPI or the Department of Education or other groups that work closely with education throughout the country?
I would never say never. The DPI is constantly putting out more and more grants. Right now, we have grants for student mental health and wellness. We have the opportunity, and we are part of a larger group. Katie's part of a regional group for equity and diversity and inclusion. I'm part of one with the Big Five. Both of us are, which has roots with the Wallace Foundation. So there's always opportunities for us to continue to look for grants that would support this. Yes, and it's a good idea. Thank you.
No, I was just going to address before, James, your question around if we're starting over. The plan you're referring to was really a list of activities that different departments were identifying as ways to intentionally or, that things that they've done to either strategically or not strategically address the opportunity gaps. Whereas the plan that we're developing now is really using a root cause analysis to form and have strategic and intentional targeted goals, action plan or action steps, and then a system to monitor it. So I just wanted to point out the difference there.
I appreciate that. But ultimately, some of what I read, those interventions and those analyses may end up being part of your new plan. I just should have no expectation that I should look at that plan when I'm evaluating your work product at all. All right. Okay.
Laura? Could you remind us again, once going forward 2 weeks, should we adopt these core commitments? What are the next steps? What does that look like to put these into motion?
Doesn't matter. Well, what we're going to do is we have to develop our goals around those commitments, and then from the goals, develop action steps. And we're taking it to our education committee. If you guys approve it, we're going to take it the next step to our education committee and get some input from them.
So to confirm, there is the opportunity for more voices to contribute to how this rolls out. We're just really making that commitment, and then how it's going to happen, and the people that it's going to affect will have more of a voice in the process. Okay, thank you.
And the other piece, we're going to develop an advisory board to make sure that we're following through on the things we commit to. And so we're in the process of gathering, we have some volunteers who are interested, and then we'll make sure there are diverse voices in that group as well.
How will you make up that? Who makes up that advisory board? Like, how are you going to, like, how many people? Can you give us an idea of what that'll look like?
We haven't identified that yet, but we'll probably do it similarly to how we identified our task force, and that making sure it's representative of our district. And then, of course, diverse work groups. So not just a group of teachers or not just a group of parents. It would be across groups.
Okay. Brian?
Has there been research into whether the other urban school districts in the state have similar policies? And has there been any discussion about, I don't want to say overlapping services and goals on that, but the possibility of collaborating with them, because that would help. I'm sure other districts are in the same position as far as our indicators, our special education identification, all the things with that, that would also open up potential to say to the state, hey, we're addressing this. We're working with 4 other districts or 5 other districts or neighboring districts, and using that as a point of emphasis as well with the state and other funding groups in the country.
So, Ms. Beyer meets with the superintendents of the Big Five, is what we call them. We meet with the student services staff of the Big Five. And we meet with them monthly where we can collaborate and discuss those types of things. And part of the one thing that we're involved in with the Big Five is the Wisconsin Urban Leadership Institute. And that is the one that's funded by the Wallace Foundation. I'm going to be going to Milwaukee Wednesday to talk about the next steps with that group, and how we can continue to collaborate. Our schools, when our staff principals went to the Wisconsin Urban Leadership Institute in the very beginning, for the pandemic, the thing they found to be the richest conversations were the conversations with the leaders from the other Big Five districts and how they were doing things and connecting. So that's a great idea.
And there's education groups that also would be able to collaborate with that. So we have administrative leaders, but we also have our educator leaders that are addressing the same issues, that through that collaboration opens up some potential revenue sources and discussion topics as far as professional development through other groups as well, correct?
And right now, the Disproportionality Network, they also have offerings that's throughout this state, but priority goes to the Big Five to provide professional learning around equity, diversity, inclusion, including, like you mentioned, special education. And those are offered to anyone in the state, and they're all virtual now. However, we're working with them because they're offered oftentimes during the school day, and it's difficult for staff to be able to attend those. So that's been at least for the last 8 or 9 years that they've offered that. And they have a grant that they're working from.
And they're working through the Department of Public Instruction.
So are the Big Five competing for the same grant money though?
There's enough money to go around.
Okay, well, yeah, when does that ever happen? Oh, okay. Go ahead, Brian. Oh.
It's a whole new question, so I think, Jason.
No, go ahead.
This is also, if it's approved, this could be shared with the firm that we selected for our superintendent search, as far as some of our guiding principles as well. So I'm assuming that Melissa is familiar with this as well, and this could be
our next leader
should be shared with
the
search firm.
Our next superintendent will have to understand that this work is a priority for our district. And we will be, as a board, having that conversation when we meet with our company now that we've chosen to come up with the profile of what our next superintendent looks like. Or what we would like our next superintendent to look like.
Right. So this is assuming this is voted on at the next meeting, and I think it's important that it become a key part of our proposal. Well, it's tied into their proposal.
Okay. Do our reps from ICSC have anything they would like to ask or any thoughts? No? Okay. Just checking. Okay. Okay. Did you have something you wanted to say? I'm sorry.
I've been waiting for somebody to say to the board, happy board week.
Oh.
It hasn't snuck in anywhere.
Is that, I thought that was last week.
Whatever.
This is principal month though, so
Okay.
thank a principal.
Okay. Thank you all. Thanks. Okay. All right, moving on to the last item under education is the Head Start carryover. And I think we're going to be talking to, oh, okay. I thought we had someone. Okay.
Mary McCabe is here in the audience if there are questions. Head Start is requesting carryover of the unobligated balance from last school year, $46,866. This was primarily from resignation of staff during COVID, positions that hadn't been filled. So the plan would be to carry it over to this school year and then use it for Head Start.
So my understanding is that this happens with some regularity, and the Sally, who used to head up the programs, once said, I think at the board table here, and this is a number of years ago, it's so hard to give the money back that they've given up trying to do it.
Yeah.
So this carryover process is something that we've had to do before. And I think that money's been earmarked for some renovations that are much needed and will expand the workspace for the East Side Head Start, I believe. Yep. Okay. All right. So we'll vote on this next
In 2 weeks.
In 2
Yeah,
weeks.
thank you.
Is there any, I'm sorry, I should open the floor up. Is there any discussion? Anybody? Okay. Then that completes our items under education. Now we are going to move on to operations, and that will be Dawn Smith.
Thank you, Laura. We are going to start out under operations with the school security drills. Is Chris with us? Or
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. Yeah.
that you?
Yep, I'll take care of this one. Twice a year, the board is required to review and approve our school security safety drills. The board received the records for the audience. These are kept confidential for student safety reasons, student and staff safety reasons. Chris Collar will be available over the next 2 weeks if, as you review, you have questions. And we would vote on these then at the next board meeting.
Okay.
Okay, are there any questions? All right, then we are going to talk about COBRA recommendations, and I think we have Brandy, right? Microphone.
Good evening. Thank you for having me here this evening. Just to give you a brief overview. When employees carry our medical insurance and they separate from employment, at that moment, they're eligible for COBRA. And it's pretty cut and dry. They immediately get sent the documentation that says they can enter into COBRA for 18 months. When an employee, unfortunately, has a serious medical condition and they go off on a long-term leave, once they've exhausted their sick leave, they move into the income protection plan, which for educators and administrators is 191 days where they continue with their 82.5% of their income, and they keep their medical insurance at the employee premium rates, 190 days for the hourly employees. If unfortunately an employee is not able to return at the end of that 190 or 191st day, they lose their position of record with the district. So, in a person who has no position of record with the district theoretically isn't employed by the district. What they do though, however, is they go into a 30-month recall window from the onset of the illness. So starting there through the 30 months, our practice has been that we've allowed the employee to continue with the medical insurance without issuing COBRA, even though they've been terminated essentially from the system and should have gone into COBRA on the 192nd day or the 191st day. What we'd like to do is go back to applying COBRA the way that it's intended. And that would be that if a person goes out for the 190 or 191 days and unfortunately is not able to return, at that moment, they're instantly given the COBRA notice and they go into 18 months of continued insurance coverage that they can carry, which essentially gets them to the end of the full 30 months. The way it is right now at the 30th month, they get 18 more months. So essentially from the date of onset, they have 4 years they can carry our insurance, even though they haven't worked one single day. We just want to go back and start applying COBRA the way that it's intended.
Could you clarify the reason that they haven't worked is because this is a medical reason. So it's not as if they're quitting for some reason that they're medically not able to work. So that would be cutting. I'm kind of concerned with the phrasing of it at the end of they haven't worked for us because they medically have not been able to. Okay. Has there been any discussion with the employee groups on this?
I forget you turned me off when you hit your button. Yeah, we've spoken with both the GBA and with the AFSD groups regarding this and didn't really have any concerns that were raised out of those conversations.
When were those conversations held?
Again, Lori Myron had the conversation with the GBA probably 3 weeks ago, and I met with the AFSD group last Tuesday evening.
I'm sorry, was this a part of the handbook coalition meetings or was this a separate discussion with them? Your mic, sorry.
The handbook committee meetings don't start until this Wednesday. This was just part of, I believe, the GBA's regular weekly meeting that they have. And we have monthly meetings with the AFSD groups. And so we brought that to them.
Okay, so basically, how much money are we talking about for these extended provision costs, the district right now? And then also I would like to know how many people would be affected by this right now, like how many teachers, how many administrators, things like that.
The cost to it is really the exposure that at the end of the 30 months, if they get 18 more months of COBRA, it's the exposure to the medical plan that is the potential risk. So there's really no savings from a standpoint of the cost by changing it to the 30 months. It's the 30th to the 48th month of exposure that we're at risk. And we don't have many people that this happens. Most individuals that go out on long-term leaves are able to return. Some people don't, and most of those that do not are likely falling into Social Security disability and would probably be getting Medicare at some point in time anyway because of their disability, which they probably are falling into.
Okay, so the union is okay with this. They think, it's not really affecting many people and and also like, why is this an issue right now?
It's just one of the practices that we can't go back and say historically why it was never applied the way it was supposed to be applied. It was just being done that way. And we were noticing that we're seeing a few people. There aren't many that end up in that situation. Probably less than 10 at the most annually.
But do you think they are like the sickest people? I mean, are there other things that other insurance products, COBRA will take care of it then? I mean, I'm not.
They are individuals who have a significant serious medical condition. We recognize that to be the case. COBRA only allows you to be able, when you separate employment, you're allowed to carry that employer's insurance for up to 18 months as a bridge to get you, hopefully, if you're going to another employer, as a bridge to get to that employer's insurance.
I have two questions with that. I just want to clarify, you said that this was discussed with, this plan was being presented at GBA approximately 3 weeks ago.
I believe that I submitted the the letter that I was prepared that we shared with you on the 13th of September. So it would have been sometime after the 13th in one of those monthly meetings.
Yes, it was this September 14th. I just put it in the chat.
And a follow-up, if we have a limited number of employees that have been on this and we don't have a concrete number as far, even an estimate as to the fiscal savings that the district would be having on this, am I correct with your answer to the previous one?
Again, these are people, individuals who are unfortunately going through some serious medical conditions, and the cost to carry them on the plan continues to be exponentially high. But I can't say a treatment for one condition is going to cost this much and treatment for another is going to cost different than that.
I guess my question is, if this has happened, we should be able to see some estimate as to what the cost has been, say, in the last 3 or 5 years in this situation. And if it's been a limited number of employees, I'm concerned about this being a policy change at this time if we're not seeing a significant fiscal impact on it and it causing added expenses for our employees when they're in the most challenging times, especially if there's not a significant amount of savings for it.
So just for the record, the difference is that if you stay on this program, you'll be paying 100% of the premium, right? This is not a subsidized premium for the employee from day 191 through the 30 months.
That is correct, yes.
COBRA costs 102% of the premium because we have a situation where we pay the 2% administrative cost for COBRA. So you wouldn't necessarily see a very direct relationship to claims exposure and what you're requesting, where you say, hey, I want to see the expenses, because it's just going to go into a rating process. And depending on your other claims exposures up and down in a given year, right, you would potentially see this kind of hidden, but it is exposure. Every other this is kind of an anomaly. Every other organization is when you terminate, you get a notice for COBRA and you're done. So the district is an anomaly in extending with outside the COBRA regulations to 30 months and then another 18 months on top of that. If that's the definition of a takeaway of some sort, I really need to understand that.
Is there also an increase in cost to employees based on a service fee with this?
I'm not sure what you mean by that.
As far as if they're transferring over, have we had current employees that are in this program that have incurred extra costs besides the increase in insurance as far as the COBRA costs on there?
They would continue to incur the same cost of the medical plan that all employees do. They're just paying the 100%. Or 102% under COBRA on the premium. That's the cost that they incur. That's what the federal regulation says is what's supposed to be applied.
Okay, anyone else? Andrew? Andrew?
Yes, so I might be open to consider this, but I think anyone in the position under the current rules should be grandfathered. I don't like, I think it's for most people in Green Bay, Wisconsin. Okay, we talk about continuing at 102% of premium. We're talking about money that would run many people into the ground, well over $1,000 a month. So I just want to make sure that we're not just taking it lightly. Oh, you'll just pay COBRA. It's not $100 a month. It's not $200 a month. It's not subsidized marketplace plan. It is a major amount of money for most, for working class, middle class people in Green Bay. I just don't want that to be lost. I guess the other thing I would say as well, this does the status quo certainly appears a bit generous. I guess I also recognize that we have generations of give and take from a bargaining process that was there that allowed, in many cases, a more generous benefit was taken in exchange for salaries that did not appreciate as quickly. So I hesitate to, when we see something that just on face doesn't make a whole lot of sense. I'd like to know what it costs before we change it or cancel it. And so I guess I would be interested in knowing how much cost is being incurred in those cases sometime before the next meeting.
The only additional cost to the employee, Andrew, is they're currently right now go into 100% premiums the minute that they go into COBRA. If they don't go on, no, excuse me, if they don't go on COBRA, they pay 100%. If we make the change, they'll pay 2%. So the cost of the employee will be an additional 2% during that 18 months if they would choose to stay on our plan during that 18-month window. That would be the cost to the employee.
So more significantly, it's that they have 18 fewer months at the end of it. Is that it?
That would be correct.
Okay.
Kids.
Is this vote time sensitive? Is there something about this issue that is there a deadline that you're trying to, no, okay. It just sounds like we might be heading to needing a little more time on this. I'm not sure about that, but it sounds like people have concerns and need maybe a little more time. I don't know. It'll be on the agenda in 2 weeks.
We'd be happy if you have questions. We'd be happy to field questions and try to get answers back to you so you have as much information as possible.
Okay.
Do you have any data that would orient us to the impact of marketplace plans? Because the alternative to COBRA, and if you're not otherwise employed, would be a marketplace plan, right? And most of those, given insufficient income, would be subsidized plans. It's been my experience that given the option between 102% premium COBRA or marketplace plans, market subsidized plans, that's usually where people end up, even in gap coverage versus it. So I don't want the board to think that this is a straight up formula 100% to 102% because the marketplace plan could potentially, given income levels, be subsidized such that it's much less expensive for services than the group plan that they would be paying for.
Yeah, I absolutely concur with that.
However, this change in policy doesn't prohibit someone from still pursuing that same thing. So in a sense, it's comparing apples to oranges on there. Where do we need to necessarily change the policy at this point? Would that eliminate their ability to still take the marketplace plans on there? Or I understand what you're saying with it, but I think that it kind of compares two different things on there. So
Andrew.
So one other thing, is this just an insurance change, or are we doing something new with a 30-month right to recall? And instead of moving someone into a 30-month right of recall, terminating the employment? Because that to me might be even, is that embedded in this insurance change?
There is no change to the IPP plan. There is no change to the 30-month recall plan. If somebody becomes physically capable of returning to an equivalent type position, we would welcome the opportunity to try to work with them to come back. It's happened 2 times in my almost 11 years here that someone's been able to come back once they went into the recall period.
But try to work with them versus having a recall position of record. There is a difference there, right?
They currently have no position of record when they end the IPP. They do lose their position of record. The only thing that we don't do is we don't put it in the system as a termination of employment, which triggers the COBRA. We alternately enter something in that allows COBRA not to go into effect.
What's a recall position then?
Well, in recall, and when you're in recall status, you're continuing to work with your position. And at a certain point within that 30 months from the onset, if you all of a sudden become medically cleared, something happens and you're physically able to come back to work, we work with the employee to try to find an equivalent position as much as we possibly find equivalent. And it is a good benefit to offer the employee. They don't have to make an application. They simply are called in and say, here's positions that we have available. These are equivalent in compensation, benefits to what you had before. What interest might you have in any of these positions? Then
So
none of that.
Does a recall position mean we will try, or does the recall position mean you will have a position if you're medically cleared? There's a difference.
You will have a position. You will have a position if you are medically cleared with the district when you're in the recall period of time. It just may not be the same position. If you're a monitor, it might be a food service position. If you're a 8th grade teacher, it might be a 6th grade teacher position. We'll try to find the most equivalent compensation benefit package we can for the employee that is now fortunately able to return to work.
I guess I'll need some clarification about if it reduces, if it has a material reduction of what your rights actually are, if you're terminated first, but we're saying you have a recall window, versus if we're not terminating you from the position, but we're calling it a recall position. It sounds to me like in one place your employment is terminated, and in another situation you are not terminated. So the answer to was your employment terminated, in one case is yes, in one case was no, and it now will be yes. That's what it sounds like to me. So is that not correct?
It's simply how we enter it into the HRIS system. If a person's position of record no longer exists, they theoretically have been terminated from a position with the district at that point in time. And right now, we're not entering it in as a termination of the position. We're entering it in that allows them to stay as if it appears the system doesn't recognize them, because that termination of the position is what triggers the notification of the COBRA.
So if I'm a math teacher on day 200 under the current system, I lose my position as a math teacher, but I'm placed into what's called a recall position for 30 months. Is that right?
You're placed in a recall status, which not a position. It simply says that we're going to keep you on our radar. And if you provide us with medical clearance that you're able to return to work, we will work with you to try to find the most equivalent position that you left previously when you went out on leave.
So yeah, so it says in the document, any employee who remains unable to return to their position loses their position of record. They then move into a recall position for 30 months. So what is a recall position?
That would be a miswording on my part. It's a recall status. It just simply means that you're out there and we're watching you and we're waiting to hear if something happens that you're able to return to work.
Okay, I would like some clarification for next time, because that may be one word, but that certainly has the appearance of a substantial difference of situation. So thank you.
Hey, Brian.
Thank you. Excuse me. And Randy, if this doesn't tie into it, just please let me know on this. Previously, because of the way our pay cycle works and our insurance coverage works, is if a district employee, someone on a teacher contract leaves for a different district, say in August, their insurance has been retroactively changed to June 30th, I believe.
That has changed. That what it is now is if an employee leaves, a teacher leaves the district, there is a bridge through August 31st now that they would remain on the insurance if they make premium payments to get them into another contract in another district.
So would that have gone retroactively then? So if someone left August 26th or 24th or some point in August, and they had a claim that was filed in late July, they would be making those premium payments for the previous 3 months on there?
The premium payments would have been made prior to that, bridging them to the August 31st. So anything that occurs from June 8th through August 31st would be covered under our medical plan.
How would this impact a similar situation then? I think you answered my question with it. If someone in that, if someone in that window, how would that impact their COBRA timing on this if this policy passes? Am I clear on it, or are we getting stuck too much in the weeds on it?
They're two separate things. An employee who is separating the district and not renewing the contract or breaks their contract is going to carry the insurance through August 31st. At that point, if they didn't find employment, COBRA would go into effect for up to 18 months at that point in time. So that process is still the same. This is different. This is specifically tied to that 191 days in the income protection plan and the recall status.
Okay, any additional questions? I guess board members, if you have specific questions, I know Andrew had shared the status and the position question, but if you have any questions between now and 2 weeks when we're going to vote on this, I would suggest sending them to Randy and Lori so that they can, get your questions answered. So we're prepared to take a vote on the 24th. Randy, thank you.
Thank you for your time.
Thanks, Randy.
Okay, our final agenda item for the night is the food service wage increase. Is Lynette online?
Josh is gonna.
Oh, Josh is here.
Good evening. So a few years ago, the base rate for the monitor position was raised, leaving the food service workers the lowest category of employee in the district in terms of their starting rate of pay. We've been having significant troubles filling these food service positions. And our main competitor is ourselves, because we keep turning over our food service workers into monitor positions. So the proposal here is to raise that base wage of our lowest paid food service worker up to $17.96. There would be no regular employee group then below that hourly rate of $17.96. That would essentially be at our minimum wage with a few asterisks for some really specialty type positions like interns and things like that. That represents a 0.9% increase. Additionally, there is a pay differential between the positions in food service. So we are proposing that 0.9% be applied to each of the 4 position types, I guess, in food service to kind of encourage that path of advancement to help with employee retention. So this will cost for 22-23 approximately $23,000. Reminder that Fund 50, which is the food service fund, is self-sustaining, almost entirely funded by federal food service aid, and actually has, if you look in your budget book from earlier today, does have a very, very healthy fund balance that we need to start working on because of the change in the way reimbursement was handled in the middle of last year, with free lunch kind of running through the end of the year when we had expected it to expire at the end of December. So that's the proposal. looking for a vote in 2 weeks. Any questions? Thank you for your time tonight.
Wait, James,
You can't escape that. Okay, so all things being equal, this is a less than 1% increase in base pay. And we are seriously seeing a movement from food service to other positions based on the difference of 16 cents. There's no other characteristic of food service that's making them move, because 16 cents seems, my position is, if we make this change and we make them equal and you don't see the retention that you expect, it's something else. And would a different increase, size of increase that can be offset by Fund 50 make a difference? And was there any analysis done for that?
Yeah, I mean, it's anecdotal at this point. We did not previously have this problem before the monitor base wage did go up. I could try to put some data together, such as it is, that may try to quantify the reason for the movement between these two bargaining units within the next 2 weeks.
I would appreciate that, just because I look at this and I can understand this from, consistency and making sure that base wage is the same across the board. But if your goal is retention, I just don't see it.
Yeah, goal is retention, but also recruitment. We are turning them over into other positions internally, but a higher base wage can attract external candidates as well, even if it is only 16 cents an hour.
Nancy?
The only thing I can think of is, can you have more hours when you're a monitor versus the lunch hours or so? You know what I mean? That's the only thing I could even think of.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I'll talk with Lynette about putting something together there.
Brian?
That was my question, is if there's a difference in hours and benefits with it as well between the two positions, but also we need to recognize that we're competing with other employers in the area for the similar positions. So if we can get that 16 cents in there, I'm all for it.
Laura?
Just a question about, do we do exit interviews for people that leave the departments or move to a different location?
Ooh, that's a good question. We do exit interviews when they leave the organization. I'm not certain, and I see Lori's face just lit up here. Not sure about transfers between departments or bargaining units.
Just when they leave the organization, when they leave the district, we do. And it can be on paper through a survey or face-to-face.
Those exit interviews are confidential and optional, obviously, as well.
Okay. Andrew, do you have anything?
I do not. Thank you.
Okay. Anybody else? Alrighty. We will be voting on this on October 24th, and that concludes the operations portion of our agenda.
Thank you, Don. Okay, that is the end of our agenda. With that, I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
All in favor? Aye. Opposed? We are adjourned. Thank you, everyone.
You have been watching the Green Bay Area Public School District's Board of Education meeting. Please visit the school district's website, www.gbaps.org, to view the program again. If you cannot fully access the information on this video, please let us know the accessibility issue you are having by calling 920-448-2025 or by email at communications@gbaps.org. We will try to provide the information to you in an alternative format and/or make the necessary improvements to make the information accessible.